science at Starling Bank, one of our best known and fastest growing digital banks. Scott Jones is Managing Director at Illustrate Digital, a user experience and development agency based in Cardiff and Bristol. Dan Mines is a digital transformation specialist at Admiral Group, owners of Confused.com, the insurance price comparison website, where he was once one of the first 5 employees. Andrew Brockway was also, judging by his biography, also one of the first 5 employees at Confused.com. And 20 years on, he still seems to be there, now as Chief Technology Officer. Also representing our price comparison site, not just for insurance, but for utilities such as gas and electricity and broadband as well, is Sally Foote, who's a Vice President in e-commerce at Go Compare in Newport. Simon Holland, you somewhere, Simon?
I'm here, hey.
Good to have you here. You're Chief Product Officer at Wealthify, the Aviva-owned savings and investment fintech based in Cardiff. Victoria Wood, I know you're here because I can see you. You're a director at V Digital and Talent V, which between them help companies digitize their businesses and attract digital talent. Kathryn Jones is a software engineer who, he's our last panelist, but far from least. I hope you're there somewhere, Kathryn.
Yes, I'm here. Good afternoon.
You're a software engineer who worked in mobile telecoms after graduating from Cardiff, but you're now back at the university teaching software engineers. Now, just one thing before we start the conversation. In addition to our panelists, we do, of course, have an audience, and we would like everybody watching or listening to be part of this discussion, so you should feel free to submit a question at any time to some or all of our panelists. I'm sure you're familiar with this, but you can use the Q&A or chat functionality. Q&A is a bit better for me, but either works at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And simply direct the questions to a particular panelist or to all members of the panelist. And you can do this anonymously, or you can do it under your name. If you do use your name, the likelihood is I might actually name you. So if you don't want to be named, please do it anonymously. Now, unlike a lot of webinars, we're not going to save these questions up. We're going to address them as we go along. So please get involved as soon as you can. We want everybody to be part of this discussion. And now there's lots to talk about and not that long to cover it all. So let's get going. I'm going to begin by asking some of our panelists what it's actually like recruiting in the digital age, and what sort of people are digital businesses looking to hire? Do they ever struggle to find people of the right sort? How seriously do employees that they're looking to hire take the corporate culture that's put in front of them? Perhaps I could come to you first, Sally Foote. I know as a price comparison site, you're obviously looking to develop partnerships with sellers of products, so you're going to need salespeople, but I guess you also need software developers and data scientists and customer relations people. Could you tell us a bit about the types of people you're looking to hire in terms of mindsets, in terms of skill sets, and tell us a little bit about whether you ever struggle to get the right people and how important.
Yes. Sure, thank you, Dominic. Yes, we recruit across sort of every single level of role that you would find within a typical digital business. So from, we have broad marketing teams, we have product teams, we have software engineers, and then kind of all the traditional support functions that you'd expect in a business across finance, legal, etc. I suppose it was a very interesting question to ask sort of what type of people that you look for, because we definitely recruit around mindset. So we look for people who want to solve the same types of customer problems that we want to solve. We look for people who are passionate about really trying to address some of the issues that we see in our market, and that's how we feel sure that those people are going to fit into our company, because they're aligned around the values that kind of form the heart of what we do. We definitely struggle to recruit. I think Wales is increasingly a very competitive space for great digital talent, and we've done a number of things to sort of try and support that. So, for example, we have the Go Further Academy, where we're working with local schools, and we have internship programs and so forth. But yeah, it's a very challenging market to recruit in. It's been interesting through COVID because it's actually taken some of those barriers away, and we've increasingly having a more distributed team. And I'd be interested to hear how some of the other businesses have found that. But you know, one of the things that we've worked really hard to do as a business is to engage with local academic institutions within Wales and schools within Wales to promote STEM careers, particularly for women, and to try and bring younger people into our organisation and support their kind of career development.
Andrew, Brockway, you're in the same line of business, as it were. Does your experience match Sally's, or do you have had a different experience?
Yeah, it's fairly similar. I think, we look for intellectually curious problem solvers in all areas of the business. So absolutely, there are going to be some kind of hard kind of STEM-like capabilities that we're looking for within technology and data. But essentially, it's personality and character that drives everything, as far as I'm concerned. So for me, the recipes of a good blend, if you like, within the organisation. You've got to care about the customer, what the customer problem is that we're trying to solve. We need to be able to understand technology and data to a good level, and we need to be able to communicate well as a team. I think if we've got those three aspects at play, we're kind of halfway there. I kind of echo Sally's comments around the kind of talent pool within Wales has been quite a challenge for the last couple of years. But having said that, since lockdown and COVID, I think we've kind of turbocharged office mobility. I think we're about 5 years into the future than we were probably in January, February. So we found recruitment over the last 3 or 4 months to be actually better than it has been for a number of quarters, I'd say. We've probably taken on about 20 people in tech and data over the last 3 months. Mainly because the challenges that some organisations are facing in terms of laying people off and making that talent pool a little bit more available, fully around the fact that we can now cast our net a little bit wider, that we're more comfortable with running on a fully distributed basis.
Thank you, Andrew. Harriet, Reese, what's your experience of recruiting generally, but also particularly during the lockdown itself? You're trying to sort of reinvent a very ancient and very traditional and somewhat stuffy industry. How hard is it to get young people to come and join you?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear other people's perspective on this. And honestly, we don't struggle for interested and particularly young people. I guess that's a little bit because of the company that we are, right? We're a startup company, as you say. We're trying to reinvent what is a very traditional industry. And I think we're kind of the go-to, straight out of uni, I would love to go and work at a tech startup that's doing well in this sphere. So we get a lot of interest from very bright, inquisitive people that have clearly been doing great things in their studies. Something that we struggle a little bit more with actually is really thinking about the diversity aspect and making sure that we're really conscious about the choices we make. I think it would be quite easy for Starling to just hire people, as I say, that are straight out of uni, perhaps all got quite similar backgrounds, all went to quite similar universities, but then we wouldn't really be putting out a product that was representative of our entire customer base. So we spend quite a lot of time thinking about the makeup of our teams and trying to make sure that we're bringing people from lots of different backgrounds, people from different age groups, not necessarily always the younger demographic, because that tends to be where we get the most interest. We're looking for people who might have actually moved to software engineering or data science as a second start for them after a previous career in something else, because we think that those sorts of individuals really bring something different to a team. And I think that that's where diversity takes on a different strand from the sort of strands that we're often talking about around gender and race. I think we can also start to think about people's experiences, both life experiences and professional experiences, and how they can bring something to a team. So that's kind of general recruitment. In the COVID time, for sure, similar to Andrew there, we've really, I think, because of the wider context with other banks and other fintechs actually laying people off, and Starling actually still having the doors wide open, we've actually remote onboarded, several individuals into the tech and data teams. We haven't had any issue with recruiting through this time, but I think that is really because of the unfortunate situation, and we do see it as unfortunate for the wider fintech group that some people have needed to lay staff off, and of course we've been really happy to be not in that position.
I think I'd kind of echo that. Simon here, we're hiring through lockdown, obviously, and I think what it has done is made people also become more aware of what they want from a company. And I think, when we're interviewing, we're looking to have a conversation with somebody rather than a traditional panel of interviewers and kind of applicant, because what we need is people that are kind of thoughtful and considered. And will bring kind of themselves, say their backgrounds, their experience, whatever they've done previously. to work. And particular for us, we're looking at kind of making a traditionally what's seen as inaccessible or not for me category, so investing available for anyone. And that actually means we need to understand exactly what other people's perceptions are of what we do. And we hire people who have never looked at investing before at all. And it's brilliant to see sometimes when they join and actually they go, okay, well, now I work for this company, I might as well kind of start. And they can start from very small. And then they start kind of sharing their experiences and talking about how kind of it empowers them or makes them feel. And so we've got this direct hub of feedback within our own staff. And then obviously we lay over that the ability for those staff to talk to people from lots of different backgrounds and understand their kind of customer perspective as well. So it really ends up being kind of a magnification, if you like, of people's experience, because they're able to speak to people, get a word in edgeways like I'm not doing here. But so that, realistically people can think about what people are saying and kind of consider that and apply that into what we do.
So Simon and Harriet, you both in effect are saying that your staff become, because they're a bit like your customers, they're actually quite good for your product development apart from anything else. Can I, and perhaps Victoria, you might have a thought on this. What are the in your experience, what are the expectations which young people bring to the office when they're, and I'm talking here exclusively of young people, not of the older people that Harriet mentioned. What do they expect in terms of what it's going to be like? What's the corporate culture going to be like at these firms? What do they want out of it? What are they seeking? What makes them happy at work?
Yeah, I think the younger generation, they're looking more for a purpose in what they do. They want to belong to a company, and they want the opportunity to actually make a difference in their work. I think historically we went to work, just to satisfy our safety and our physical needs, but actually now we want purpose and we want the opportunity to make a difference in what we're doing.
Is purpose the same thing as meaning? They want to come home at night and feel they've done something worthwhile.
Yeah.
To the world, right? Okay. Now, Kathryn Jones, you engage presumably with people of all ages, but quite a lot with people who are graduating or doing postgraduate work. So exactly the demographic which Victoria has just described. Does what she said ring true to you? It's all about purpose and meaning. It's not about paying the mortgage and putting food on the table anymore.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that triangle that talks about safety and kind of needing to meet those, keeping yourself warm and feeding yourself. They're obviously really important and always will be. But I think from the students I speak to, they're looking to get further up that pyramid quicker. They want to have a job that's engaging. They want something that sort of challenges their curiosity, that problem solving. And I think Victoria's exactly right with what she's saying. Every student, every graduate I've spoken to about this, they will say, I want interesting work. And when I'm there, I want to feel part of something, of a team. And I think that's really, really important.
And I think that I support that as well in terms of it's critical for kind of employee engagement. The pace of change in pretty much any industry now is rapid. And so if as a company you're not able to support people in making a change and them seeing the outcome of that pretty quickly, they'll start to look at other companies that are making changes. And so in order to kind of keep people, it almost becomes a kind of hygiene factor that actually I do a piece of work, I see an outcome from it that aligns with what I want to do, and then kind of move on from that. And I think with feedback loops from customers and so on, we're making that much more accessible. I mean, we speak to customers now over this medium instead of perhaps face to face, and it makes it quicker. So you hear more, and we're kind of always led on that feedback, and employees thrive on that as well.
Good opportunity to bring you in, Dan Mines, because you're a pretty large employer in this sector in South Wales, and you've heard what's been said about young people wanting work which is meaningful, purposeful, and interesting. Are you able to supply that at the office or not? How hard is that to do?
I think, interestingly, I work for Admiral, and you by associating me with the bigger insurance business, you highlight one of the challenges that I have personally. So Admiral has a history of being very entrepreneurial. One of its founders is still running the business as a group chief exec. But I work for a financial services business, a lending business, which is one of the many individual companies that sit underneath the Admiral brand. And one of the challenges we have, we're a scale-up, right? So we've got 150 people. We've grown to, hundreds of millions of pounds worth of lending over, a short 2.5 year period. It's an exciting place to work. We use, brand new technology. And one of my challenges is to convey that to some of those, some of the talent out there who come through the door, who perhaps assume that we're part of the kind of the bigger insurance business, and that's also good because that brings a different type of person. That's very effective for more mature staff, and we'll come to that later. I'm sure that those staff who are looking for more security, but actually, the Starlings of this world probably enjoy through their brand presence a great deal of young people coming straight out of university with huge enthusiasm to learn and get as far as they can, as quickly as they can. And so I guess your brand can have quite a big impact on who's coming through the door as well.
Thank you, Dan. Harriet, I can see you want to say something, but I'd like to just bring in Scott Jones, who's been waiting very patiently to contribute to our discussion. And Scott, I had a look at your website, and you said you believe working with great people, great mindsets produces amazing results. You're not dressed in suits, you're not uptight, you're always up for making genuine friendships. Now, you obviously think that message works for the type of people you want to recruit to your company, who I assume are developers and designers, relationship managers, those sort of people. Has what's been said here about the need for meaning and purpose and interesting and rapid, progression through the hierarchy, if you like, or lack of hierarchy even, does that resonate in your experience as well, the type of business you're in?
Yeah, we're obviously quite different to a lot of the other people that have spoken here because we're a much smaller entity, and we sort of, you hire us in when you have a need, essentially, to sort of plug a gap or sort of work on your marketing specifically. But for us, yeah, I think it's similar because we work in a specialist field, and it's been something we've purposely done. We wanted to not just be one of the generalists in the marketplace. We wanted to be a specialist where you can come to us to get excellence. And I think that's where excellence aligns really well with purpose, because you can be an excellent junior, you can be an excellent senior. It doesn't matter of your level. You can put all of your effort into something, knowing that you're adding value and that you're genuinely producing results. And I think that's a great message, as much for our clients as it is for our employees and potential employees. If we can get them both engaged in the same way, knowing that value will be added, that excellence will be delivered, then actually that makes it makes hiring easier in one sense, but more challenging in another, because you know that you need a specific breed of person, and that you're looking to bring diversity into that mix as well. So for us, I totally echo what Harriet said. It's that you're trying to create the diversity in the team. You're trying to reflect multiple different audiences for multiple clients, not just one audience for one business. Yeah, I think in doing that, we've got a healthy mixture of mostly sort of young people, where we need to bring them into our specialism and teach them from junior level upwards. A nice mixture of people who are already experienced in the marketplace, but they're obviously more difficult to find and usually work for other brands. And also people who have gotten to a point in life where they want to do something different. And, we are now head of operations, only started working with us sort of 2-3 years ago. He managed Tesco stores for sort of 15 years of his life, always wanted to be a developer. And he came in at the bottom rung. He came in as a junior developer, and he worked his way up to, mid and senior. And now he, practically runs the agency from an operational point of view, which is, a massive success story for us. But that's exactly what we want to be doing. I think we can all complain that there's not enough developers, designers, all that sort of thing out there, but we need to be working to create them as well. So yeah, that's sort of our view on it.
Harriet, so I can see you want to chip in on this, but could I ask you to maybe think about one of the other panelists, and I'd like Sally and maybe Andrew to chip in on this as well, which is that Dan said something very interesting which resonated with me, which is that we have modern technology. And I know from the traditional banks that I've spent most of my career talking to, one of the reasons they find it difficult to recruit young talent is their technology is so out of date. You know, we're talking sort of COBOL systems written in the 1970s, but the disconnect between their day-to-day life and what happens at the office is so great they don't want to work there. So legacy technology may be an issue. I'm interested what Sally and Simon and Andrew think about that. But Harriet, you wanted to say something else.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm just echoing the thoughts of my fellow panelists. But on the topic that you just mentioned, Dominic, I think that's really key to the change that we need to see there is very key to how we can address this problem. I think that fundamentally, you know, inviting young people to build a process or a system that's then going to be left somewhere for 20 years before it's going to be revisited and try to be improved isn't a very exciting prospect. I think that inviting people to come together to work on a project that you're going to iteratively improve through time and constantly evolve with cutting edge technology at the forefront of that is a much more exciting prospect, right? And I think is better for both the institution that is going to be benefiting from that system and also for the people working on it, because they can see improvement in real time and they are remaining at the cutting edge of their field. So I think that maybe there's a bit of change in mindset from some of the incumbent banks or more traditional players in financial services around not seeing these projects, these IT or digital projects, as a one-off, do it, tick it, and leave it in a box for a few years. It needs to be more of an iterative process where kind of continuous improvement is at the forefront of it.
I think, I'm sorry if I just add in quickly. I think where you actually end up is this implementing technology as an enabler rather than IT as a service, and therefore technology is baked into your strategy and your ability to answer your customer problem, and I think satisfying your customers, certainly for most of the B2C operations that I see sat around the table, is absolutely key, right? And all of us are consumers, and actually having a very mixed environment is good anyway in all walks of life, but it's also a great way to make sure that as consumers we're reflecting that into the products that we design and build.
Andrew, did you want to add something? I thought you did.
Yeah, I think from the legacy challenge, it's the perennial thing. In my opinion and my experience, we've had, you know, Confused.com's been going for 20 years. We've gone through multiple iterations of the tech stack and the engineering, data estates, all that kind of thing. And I've come to the conclusion that it's not a transformation, it's an ongoing wave. You've got to be in the right place of the technology curve. Don't take on the fads because you might end up down a blind alley. Equally, don't forget about that long tail of technical debt because it's just going to come back and, you know, and bite us as an organization. It's important from a retention perspective as well as recruitment. I think that people want to, you know, people of technology use good, elegant technology. And I think the diversity conversation does play into this to a certain extent because our customers are diverse, our workforce is diverse, so we've got to kind of embrace that and kind of get the best mix of gender, class, background, and race as we can possibly fulfill. I think that's really important. And I take Dan's point that, you know, IT isn't really a service provider anymore. It's actually part of this hub. It's the heart of the business now. And the challenge, I think, for some of the older insurers and older banks is they've got to kind of turn that around and keep the train running at the same time. So, you know, it's like when you're doing a re-architecture, it's like you're putting the tracks in front of a moving train. It's not an easy thing. But I guess that gives good opportunity and good scope for the likes of Starling and Co to kind of come in and actually help the customer in more elegant ways, because that customer expectation is through the roof now.
Sally Foote, you're
Yeah, I'm keen to jump in on that a little bit. I mean, I think what's interesting with legacy tech is that there's very few organizations who can claim to not have any level of legacy tech. I've worked with startups who are a year old who've already got some legacy parts of their architecture. And so I think it's, for us, the key thing is enabling our teams to solve for that and to move on from it. So we use a squad model, and that squad model is all about empowering teams to make the best decisions to reach a goal. So they have a broad overarching goal, and as a team they decide how they're going to solve that goal. And sometimes that goal is a more feature-led approach. They land up developing new customer-facing features, and sometimes they have technology solves in there. So for example, one of the teams we've just spun up, the first thing that they've decided that they want to do is move to a single page application architecture for a core part of the site. And that's not something you'd kind of ever set out, but that's the team working together with different sets of skills in that squad and deciding that actually the fastest way to get to the goal that they're working towards is to change the architecture, or fundamentally change the architecture of that page structure and that technology. And that's for us is the way that we balance that, is by enabling the teams to make the decisions about how they want to move stuff forward, and then sharing the skills between them, and getting the point to the team where everyone can be working in the same way. And yeah, for us, that's important, is that the people that you're hiring are as much part of changing your organization as the organization is.
the technology wave you're surfing has a downside as well as an upside. I'm interested in Kathryn's view on this, and also Victoria's view on this. Victoria, first of all, with you, should young people be afraid of technology as well as excited about it? Well, I'm referring here, of course, to AI, machine learning, robots. Are they going to be pushed out of work in the long term? And to what extent does that figure in their thinking as they start work?
Yeah, I think we need to acknowledge the fact that it is going to change how we work and the jobs that we do, but I think equally we do need to embrace it, because actually it has the scope to take out a lot of mundane process in our role. And I think the younger generation, as I mentioned earlier, you know, we want purpose in what we're doing. We want to be creative in the work that we do, and we want more work-life balance. And actually AI and machine learning can enable that. So I think it's something that we need to think about in a positive light.
Kathryn, what's your perspective as a technologist?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say the robots are already here. They might not be ex-machina style, but they are. And we've just sort of exited from, I think, some of the lowest unemployment in the UK. I know COVID's had an effect on that now. But given that they're here, and given that AI is here to an extent now, employability has been good. So I think what happens, and lots of economists have looked at this, the neoclassical economists looked at it, and what generally happens, you can go back to things like Industrial Revolution, is that jobs pivot. You might lose them in this area or in this way, but they'll grow in different ways, and they might be different jobs than we anticipated. So I think students and graduates, they'll have it in their mind, as most people do, but I think there's plenty of avenues for them to go into now. It's not something that's disastrous for us right now. It just means we've got to change as the technology does.
I think just to add to that, I think, and it's particularly relevant to some of the things the government's doing in intervention as well, but as consumers, we all want simple, smart and relevant, right? So we're driving this adoption of technology. I think there's a lot of talk about AI and the tech, but the cloud providers have commoditized a lot of that. You know, obviously there's extremes of expertise where that isn't the case, but for most of what the consumers want, it's being driven by the experience they're having on their phone from various other services. And in our world, FS has to catch up. But I think that means that the staff are able to focus on perhaps what you said earlier, being more fulfilled. They can focus on solving customer problems necessarily rather than having to do some of their own work. And I was on a call last night and talking about the potential for £150 million of funding to go into an AI centre in Wales this year. And that, I think, also reflects how broader society is looking at this to drive forward. You really have to grab it with two hands and move forward. I don't think you can afford, as a society or as a business or as an individual, to step back. Clearly, you have to be. There are privacy lines around data and so on and so forth. You have to be cautious, but standing and watching the world go by isn't ideal, is it?
I'd like to turn in a minute to talking about the essence of this discussion about culture, both from an employee perspective and from a customer perspective. But before we do, I'd be interested in quick thoughts from Sally, Simon, Andrew, Harriet, maybe from you as well, Dan. Presumably, quite a lot of your customer demographic don't want to interact with you through digital means. They want to talk to face, they want to be on the telephone. Is that a dying share of the customer base, or is it a constant share of the customer base? And do you have to maintain telephones as well as computers in order to cater for that? Maybe Harriet, you first on this, just very quickly.
Sure, yeah. I think it's a really interesting question to pose at this time. I'd say that COVID has been a realization for everybody that we've had to actually rely on technology as pretty much a lifeline to keep in touch with the outer world, keep abreast of developments going on for our own safety, and to just kind of carry on with as normal a life as we possibly could across many facets of our life, be that, ordering or shopping online or doing your banking online. So I think that more and more customers are totally au fait with the fact that digital technology and interactions via digital means are actually, a good thing, and actually they allow us to continue as normal in these crazy times with pretty seamless adoption. I'd say that COVID and that realization that it's caused will result in fewer people feeling that they need physically to go to a bank branch or go to a post office if they can do things online, because actually we've all had to adapt quite quickly to this crazy situation, and I think that we'll probably see that continue as we go back to somewhat more of a normality.
Thank you. Andrew, what's your reaction to that, the non-digital versus the digital native versus the digital stranger?
Yeah, it's interesting because, the huge majority of our customer base will transact with us online. We do have a very small telephone team that will take customer inquiries over that channel. It's interesting because when you think about customer engagement, and for our business, we may take, say, 100 different data points around a customer to basically be able to give them the view of the market in terms of their insurance or financial services products and help them make the right decision. But the reality is that without that kind of nuanced conversation, you do end up losing a bit of fidelity, right? It's not like an old school broker where you can actually get to know the customer really and truly. And what technology is trying to do, I think, in my opinion, is by taking additional factors, whether it's around the mobile device footprint or additional variables around how they're coming in, how they're interacting with the service, you try to derive more information and more nuance about the customer. And that's potentially a double-edged sword, because if we start making decisions based on inference and these additional data points and run those through machine learning models, and you get into the kind of realms of ethics and making the right decisions at volume, it's a potential minefield. So I think the challenge, I guess, for us really, for the pure digital players, those pure plays, is how do we get that nuance in a way which is safe and hygienic and secure. It's a great problem to solve for. And as Dan mentioned, you've got commoditized AI platforms which have kind of simplified the adoption of these kind of technologies. But we're then behooving to kind of deploy that in a responsible way, which is good for the customer and society, right? Because we don't want to have approvals or ratings that kind of create customer harm, essentially. So it's a real balancing act. We want to engage further with the customer as much as we possibly can, but it's got to be done in a sane and kind of clear way.
Simon, are you achieving digital intimacy without breaching ethical boundaries?
Yeah, I'm confident we are. And I think the way you do that is actually by speaking to customers. I think if you're relying purely on data and inference from those kind of data indicators, you end up missing out on, I guess, some of the key issues. Unfortunately, we're kind of categorized as a robo wealth manager. So the industry category kind of has robot in the name. But I mean, we actively outbound call our customers to find out how they're going pretty much a couple of weeks after they've signed up, see what they're doing. And some of the kind of feedback on that is absolutely brilliant. And like, a machine as yet hasn't got to the point of understanding all of the backgrounds of people and where people have come from. And money is one of the most complex and emotive subjects when you speak to people. You know, and category number one, people in the UK don't like speaking about money. So trying to get under that it is a real challenge. But once you get into it, there's so many cognitive biases about people putting money aside is actually robbing from themselves and that kind of stuff. And I don't think we haven't found a machine that does that for us yet. But what we do is make sure that machines get rid of the kind of the process and operational overhead and risks, so that we can go and have those really good kind of conversations and dialogues, and then turn them into digital experiences that cover off people that, you know, don't want to speak to us, but want to have a really good digital experience.
Hi, Scott. I'm concentrating on the sort of top right-hand quadrant of my screen, which I'm perhaps liable to ignore you due to some mental blockage. But I think this is a topic which is very central to what you do, because you are advising clients on the digital experience of their customers. Do you have a clear idea in your mind of what a great digital customer experience looks like and feels like? That you can encapsulate in a few words?
Yeah, I think putting it really simply is things like validation.
We're losing you a bit. Have we lost you completely?
Sorry, I think my Wi-Fi dropped out my back. Yeah.
No, you're back now. Yes, we heard the word validation. That was all we heard.
Sorry, yeah, I think one of the key things, like really simply, is just around validation. Like the validation of form fields and stuff like that is not the customer's issue; it's your issue as the tech provider. So the more that you can test and iterate and improve your user experience, whether that be something as simple as a marketing form, sign-up form, or part of your actual, you know, customer journey, improving that user experience on a regular basis and learning from your users, learning from their behavior. I think, you know, that makes massive improvements towards their perception of you, and ultimately the conversion rate as well of your product or your service.
Just a thought from my perspective and looking at, I think there's a huge array of people on here, and we'll all have different views on how we want to go about doing conducting our interactions with different organizations. And I think that's the key bit. Earlier I mentioned relevant. I think it's about being able to be where the customer is and offering them service that they want at that time. I think the technology and the implicitness of digital services and the number of platforms you can deliver over means that a consumer doesn't want to have to work so hard at getting to the end solution. They should be able to have something that's automated when they want to. They should be able to speak to somebody when that's relevant too. And I think the important thing for consumer-led businesses is to make sure that you're automating that in such a way that it just happens seamlessly. And you can choose the channel that really works for you at the time that really works for you. And I think if I look around, there's some slight differences in the types of products that are being offered. So you've got myself and Harriet and Simon all have quite heavy consumer B2C propositions where conducting and building a good intimate relationship with our customers who have money with us or from us is really important. Whereas if you look at Sally and Andrew's model, they do a fantastic job of bringing in huge volumes of traffic to people like ourselves in Admiral Financial Services, because they're the source of our customers. And aggregation and price comparison is a really interesting model there. And because we talk about digital as if it's something new, but the two companies are, you know, themselves, or one's almost 20 years old. They drove the digital change in the way that we purchase products a very long time ago. And I say the two companies because the CEO that Sally works for was sat around the table with Andrew all that time back, and the two of them and others set an example of what digital was and how you move people from phones on direct insurance acquisition and into web journeys. And I think now it's about it's been much more about taking them from web journeys to the other channels that they use, but in a digital means.
Thank you, Dan. Now, in the 50 minutes or so we have remaining, I'd like to talk explicitly about culture from a customer and an employee experience. But could I begin perhaps with you, Kathryn, because you're in an interesting position because you started in academia, you went into industry, you worked in the commercial industrial sector, and then you've come back to the grove of academe. What did that journey tell you about the credibility, if I might put it that way, of corporate culture? In a minute, I'm going to ask our panelists to describe their corporate culture to us and tell us what's good about it. But have you come back from that experience a cynic or an enthusiast for culture?
So I worked for small to medium-sized companies and a startup, and I think what I realised is culture can be aided and shaped to an extent by the company, but it's also the employees that can really make it work and happen. So it's getting the right fit with the employees in the company, and also, you know, sometimes, and especially in a tech company, you don't want the same type of people. You don't want just the geeky tech people. You also need those, you know, those people in teams that really gel everything together, and they bring people, and maybe that's their big contribution, is how they make that team work. And I think that's what resonated most for me in the companies I worked in, is finding those people, because those people can help you craft that culture and that sense of team and that sense of belonging. And I think that does come down to how you, again, I think Simon mentioned earlier, it's about, and to really be able to see people's personalities coming out in interviews and how people communicate and this sort of thing. But yeah, I worked then towards larger companies, and I think it's more tricky when the company gets bigger to keep this culture going across the whole organisation, and maybe there's ways of doing that I wasn't exposed to.
Is there a risk that if a culture is too strong, that it becomes hostile to the outside world? Information stops coming into the company from outside. Did you ever see that?
I worked for large telecom companies in the US, and no, I didn't really see that their culture was overwhelming, but if anything, that their culture was becoming less existent. So there was less opportunities for teams to be together and integrate because the company was so big. And I think getting that right is difficult.
Scale's a problem then.
I think there's always potentially a problem of that. I used to work in a kind of bank-backed startup in London, and there was very much a tendency to have a culture of kind of young, quite hippie people that were kind of working for a startup and finding it really cool and sort of skateboarding home. And not everybody does that. And so I think Harriet's point around making sure that you do hire people like across a broad spectrum, and that's in terms of, you know, their own cultural sort of view, and are just able to communicate that and talk about that, I think is probably the best defense for that, rather than, you know, you can end up having a particular city effect. I guess, you know, we have the benefit of the fact that we're not in London, and London really does have a kind of hyper culture about itself, and every other city has its own kind of vibe. But I think it is important that people aren't just immersed in one culture, and they really figure out that there are others out there, and they're inquisitive about them.
Okay, now Harriet, could we talk about your culture at Starling? I went to your website and I looked at what you say about culture. There's quite a lot there, that you're on a mission to reshape banking, you want a workplace culture. You've talked about this already: fairness, inclusion, compassion, non-discrimination. You're growing fast, no 2 days at Starling are ever the same. But there's more to life than work. You have cheese and wine nights, learning lunches, fresh fruit and coffee every day, free breakfast. I don't know what a perk box is, but you've got gym memberships.
Like a job advert for us. Thank you.
How convinced are you that statements like that translate into a meaningful experience, both for the employees and for the customers? Is it just motherhood and apple pie, or does it really inform what goes on day to day for employees and day to day for customers?
I think the very beginning of what you just read out from our website is the bit that resonates with me as what really defines our corporate culture at Starling. Not that we call it our corporate culture, but our culture. And that's about changing banking for good. And I think that that's really the thing that we all hold at the forefront of our mind when we're talking to people who want to join Starling for a job. It's that every day we look at problems that there are in banking as a wider industry or in the Starling product today and say, what's wrong with this? How can we make it better? And not be afraid to actually just completely reinvent the wheel if we need to, and start from scratch. And I think that that's something that's been there at Starling since the very beginning. When Anne founded Starling, she wasn't founding banking. There were already banks and they were doing a job, but she just didn't think they were doing a good enough job. And so she was brave enough to say, okay, we're going to start this again and we're going to do it a bit differently this time. And I think that's really at the forefront of our minds when we think about kind of who we think will be good Starling employees and will really kind of fit with the rest of the team. I think that, to Kathryn's point, I think that, whilst that might be our end goal, we have to appreciate that there are lots of different skill sets that we need in different people in varying forms and in varying amounts across the way to achieve that end goal. And so I think that where Starling has been cautious to date to kind of really define core values is actually, I think, to its benefit, because we've tried not to be too prescriptive about the specific types of people that we need, because I think we recognise that ultimately we want our customer base to be represented by our staff, and so we need to make sure that we're capturing all different types of people from all different backgrounds. Variety is the spice of life. We want everybody that is representing our customer base to be represented in our staff base, and we feel that that's how we'll make sure that we bring a product to market that is really fit for purpose.
Okay, now Victoria, you're in a good position to know whether young people have a cynical or a naive or a welcoming attitude to the culture statements which companies make about what a great place it is to work. Do you have a sense of what people really think when they read a culture statement on a corporate website? How believable, how credible they find it? You're on mute, Victoria. You're on mute.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I think it's a good initial starting point for people when they read your website and they start to buy in that. But I think you can't, you have to have a good candidate experience. People these days will do their research and they will get a vibe off you when they go through the interview process. They'll look at things like Glassdoor. So it only holds so much weight, especially in Cardiff. We live in a village essentially in South Wales. Everybody knows everybody. It's like 1 degree of separation. So it's very easy to find out what it's really like to work somewhere. So I think it's great to have that shop window, but it has to be authentic. There is no point in you painting this great picture of somewhere to work if that isn't actually the reality when you come on board.
Sally, I went to your website as well. You describe your culture as genuine, open, bold, driven and fair as your core values. You talk about being a caring bunch. You do lots of charity stuff at work. You talk a lot about your cutting edge technology and so on. Hearing what Victoria says about actually the experience at the office has to correspond to what the chat people get in the pub after work and what they read on Glassdoor and elsewhere. Do you ever worry there's a disconnect between what you think you are and what the staff think you are?
This has been one of the few companies that I've worked for in my career that I haven't worried about that. I found the Go Compare culture to be quite unique in terms of the types of organisations that I've worked with. And for me, a lot of that starts with the CEO. I suppose one of the ways that we would also describe our culture is very sort of customer first and values led. So, and that absolutely 100% starts with Lee Griffin, who is the constant champion of the customer within the organisation and in everything that he does. And all of those values that you just described that we put on our website, he does that on a day-to-day basis. So during the floods in Wales in February, he was out there with a shovel helping local communities, and he took half the company with him to do that. And so I think there's, you don't have to be involved with our organisation or talk to that many people to have great examples of that culture in real life. And yeah, and I think the CEO and how that then flows through the organisation is a really important part of bringing the culture to life. And you should be able to see that both in the people that you meet in the organisation and in what you see that organisation doing in their local community.
Yeah, the CEO has to walk the walk as well as talk the talk, and I know many companies where that's not actually the case. Now, Dan, Mines, I loved your corporate, right? You've got a Ministry of Fun, and you've got a Ministry of Health. Are those new developments, and are you confident that the staff find those an important and integral part of their working experience?
No, they've always been there, and the culture of Admiral, the parent company, kind of follows through into the business I work in. It follows through in Compuse, and it's probably had its impact on GoCo as well, because Leo worked in Admiral for a bit, and it's always centered around the customer, and happy staff. And it goes to a huge amount of effort to make that happen. What's interesting to me, and unashamedly, we're here on a Fintech Wales webinar, so I think it's probably good to draw out the differences. In Harriet's world, and certainly in central London, you've got a huge amount of transients. You've got fresh young people heading off to the city to see the pavements lined in gold. So, you have to work very hard to make sure that your staff are happy. I remember coming back from London in the late 90s and going to get a job in Cardiff, and suddenly realising that I'd have to buy my own breakfast because there was no kitchen with cereals and milk provided for me free, which was happening in London at the time. Whereas Admiral's always had that kind of staff culture. I think what's very different now is that, as Victoria said, South Wales has got a lot of companies doing a lot of great things. Two of the biggest aggregators are here. They're very digital businesses sucking up resource. We've got lots of stuff going on, but it's still a very small community. So it's not just Glassdoor. The developers in South Wales have WhatsApp groups, all sorts of stuff. So it's like wildfire. If you're a bad employer, it gets around really quickly. But equally, because we don't have a huge flow of talent coming in the same way that a city like London does, you have to work conversely, you're having to work much harder now, which is a really positive thing for the customer, for the staff, and therefore their families, I think, because let's not forget, happy employees go home happy, and that has a positive impact too.
Simon, there was a lot on your website about culture towards the customer. There wasn't a lot about culture towards the employee. How would you describe your culture if you work at Wealthify on a daily basis? What's the attraction?
I guess that's probably kind of on purpose, in the fact that we are purpose-led and we're aiming to make investing accessible for anyone. And that includes our staff, and anyone is pretty nebulous. So we're looking to get people involved in that don't have to have an investing background or anything. And I think it comes back down to really wanting to participate in something and have empathy towards lots of different kind of walks of life and people. Like, we have people who have £1 invested in a plan, and we have people who have hundreds of thousands of pounds invested in a plan. And you've got to be kind of curious about people and open to kind of understanding what those things are. And so I think our kind of culture for our staff is very similar to the culture that we're projecting for our customers. And so when you say, is it important, or how important is it that the bit of your culture is reflected internally? I think now more than ever. I mean, I'm hiring somebody who's joining on Monday, and realistically, my opportunities to kind of tell them what the culture is going to be pretty limited to a bit of like video interaction. I'm going to go and meet her on the first day, but then actually it's got to come true. And in our hiring, we make sure that people understand what our culture is about, and also understand what they're going to bring to that. And so if it didn't ring true on day one, we'd see people walking out the door. And hiring is hard and expensive. Hiring, I think, anywhere is hard. I don't think it matters too much in terms of talent pool, as long as there is some population there, which I think we've got here. Getting the right person for the job, it always takes time, and always ends up sort of speaking to lots of different people. So yeah, I think our culture is what we are.
Thank you, Simon. We've only got about 3 minutes left, but I'd like everyone to give us some final thoughts on corporate culture. Scott, could I just, before we go to that final closing comments, could I just ask you, in one sense, it's very easy to put on your website a culture which appeals to the woke generation, if you like. And a lot of what I've read does accord with that, and why not? These are the young, talented people you need to attract into your business. You need to attract, as Harriet has said very articulately, people from a diverse range of backgrounds. But diversity also means, including not just the older customers, but maybe the more old-fashioned, in terms of values, type of customer. Do you sometimes find yourself working with clients who are either unable or unwilling to change the way they describe themselves to customers and to employees? In other words, is this value system moving too fast for some businesses that you have to advise?
We don't really handle the content or the marketing side of anything that we do, because we're handling platform and experience. So that might be a slightly difficult one for me to answer. And I think essentially no as well, because we're really keen to almost vet our clients the same way we vet our team members in terms of onboarding. We want to do excellent work, so we know that we can only do that with people who are willing to sort of play ball with us in the way that we work. So yeah, I think our values ideally reflect back out into the clients we work with as well. We want an innovative culture on the client side. We want transparency. We want the whole point of using an agency is to allow them to bring their experience to the mix. So if we can't say what we think is best, and we can't do that openly and bluntly and transparently, then it's not really going to work, and it doesn't work, and it doesn't particularly last long with clients who operate that way.
Now, we must stop in a minute, but I'd just like to ask each of you one question. Maybe I'll start with you, Kathryn. Is corporate culture measurable? And if so, do you measure it? And can you get a financial return on it? Is there a measurable return on investment in your corporate culture? What have you seen, Kathryn?
So one measure I always use is how do I feel on Sunday night? And I always feel good about going to work on Monday. And I tell my students, if you get to the point in your life where Sunday night is not good news for you, then maybe it's time to look at something else. And that is directly linked to your corporate,
I love that, Kathryn.
Culture. That's directly linked to how you feel the next day. And it's all, that's to do with you as an employee and an employer. So that's how I would measure it.
Yeah, I love that. You obviously had bad Sunday nights in some of the roles you had in the past.
Yeah.
I'll just move around the screen here. Sally, do you measure how your staff feel on Sunday nights?
I think we should, actually. I'm going to steal Kathryn's idea. But I think sort of for us, a big part of understanding how successful our culture is how much people feel like they belong. And I think there's that age-old advice that, when you're choosing a partner for life, you should align around values rather than anything else. And I think that's probably true of how you choose the organizations you work with, and how you employ people into your organization is aligning on values, because people then feel like they belong because they're working on something that they align with, that they believe in. They're there because of the mission that they're on, and they're with a team of people who are on that same mission, rather than because of what they look like or their skills or experience. And so I think that's a little bit about how we measure it and think about it.
Simon, do you explicitly measure corporate culture and the return you get on it?
I think we can, and we do, albeit I don't have it down as a particular number. And I think it's really reflected in how people engage and how people participate in things that you do. And it's really important for me. I have a lofty title of Chief Product Officer. That doesn't mean I know the best product to build or the best experience to build. And so really, I'm going to be relying on the team to engage with the questions that we're asking, the problems we're trying to solve. And I think so, we'd measure that by how people, how enthused people are by joining in and doing that, and getting people from different teams that feel that whilst maybe that particular question isn't their role and isn't their KPI to solve, they have an opinion that they want to offer, or they believe that solving it will be better as an outcome for an organization. And so I fundamentally believe that you can measure it by delivering great outcomes, and the way in is basically getting great participation.
Dan, now I know you do measure culture. You're doing these staff surveys, you put them on your website with 95% of people working at Admiral think it's a great place to be. So you do think you can measure culture, and do you put a number on the return you get from it as well?
Yeah, it's very clear. We invest in whole departments to make sure that the staff are enjoying themselves and living the best they can. I think ultimately the success of the company, and if you want, therefore, the profitability of that company comes down to two things, doesn't it? How well you're serving your customer and how well your staff are building products or serving that customer, sometimes, face to face. So that's at all levels. That can be from a chief product officer all the way to people on the end of the phone and who are the first point of contact for our staff. So, you could come up with lots of KPIs, but bottom line, if you're a consumer-led business, you're going to know if your culture is wrong, because you won't be serving your customers in the right way, and that will ultimately impact on your bottom line.
Your financial measures tell you whether you're getting your culture wrong. Andrew, is it any different at the other piece of Admiral?
It's probably slightly different, but I think the core principles are the same. So we survey our staff every quarter. We've got some questions which kind of center in on culture. So one of them, for example, is, would you recommend Confused.com as somewhere for one of your friends to come and work? And we'll score in the high 90%, so that's a good sign. We look at things like length of service. So, okay, Cardiff's a smaller pool, so maybe people are a little bit stickier than maybe in London, but average length of tenure in tech is about 7 years. We get people coming back. They leave the organisation, they come back to work with us. But culture is quite an ephemeral thing to measure, right? It's difficult to put, hard pound signs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what I would say is that my technology manifesto, somebody mentioned the Maslow hierarchy of needs, and I'm a big fan of that. I think Wi-Fi is down there now, isn't it, as well as food and warmth. But culture for me is the baseline. If you get culture wrong, we're not going to be able to deploy technology in an elegant way, and we're not going to be excellent at doing that, right? So the kind of cultural kind of characteristics I look for are kind of open, generative, challenging. We're giving people a chance to prove themselves, and we're going to invest heavily in these people. And the overarching kind of principle, I guess, for me is that the people that come into the organization, my goal really is when they do exit eventually, they're better for it. They come out of it far more marketable, they've got far more skills, they've reached their kind of potential, we've helped them on their way. And if we can do that, we're going to benefit and the customer's going to benefit. So it's a virtuous circle. But it's tricky it's one of those things you've got to smell. You can have metrics on it, but you've got to be out there and observing how people are behaving and interacting. I think that's really important.
I agree.
Can you put a number on the success of your culture? And I've worked for companies that do staff surveys, and the degree of cynicism that staff fill them in. Who's going to see this? Can I be honest? How useful was the data at the end of it? Are you able to quantify the success of the culture you've been very articulate about this afternoon, and indeed on your website as well? Can you put a number on it and the return you get from it?
So at Starling, we don't put a number on it. And I think I'm very aligned with what Simon and Dan mentioned around, your end product. I think that ultimately that end product is the work of your employees. And if those employees are engaged and working in an environment where they feel that they can flourish, do their best work, they really care about what they're doing, you're going to have a great product at the end of it. And that's going to return for you in all the financial ways, profitability measures that, your board and execs are going to want to see. I think that there's potentially some signs and signals that you can look for along the way that might be indicative of some problems or areas of concern for you with regards to company culture. Things like retention of staff, things like some of the metrics that we've mentioned here around the Sunday night feeling. But I think that ultimately, you will see an impact on your bottom line if your staff are not comfortable with their employee culture.
Now, Victoria, you mentioned Glassdoor, for example. That's a metric people could look at regularly as a measurement. There are probably ways in which you could start to measure the gossip that goes on in the Welsh village, which you referred to as well. Do you think culture is measurable?
I think it is measurable, and surveys are great, but I think you have to, you just have to be on the pulse, and just like Kathryn said, that's Sunday night feeling. We do, you know, we're only a small team, but I'll put out random polls for people to ask them how they're feeling about their work, just impulsively. And I think just talking to people, and you have to create an environment where people feel safe and they feel like they can speak their truth. And if people stop telling you how they're feeling, or they stop, you know, presenting you with ideas, then you have to recognise that there's been a shift in your culture. I think retention is obviously a good one, and you'll see that in larger companies. If you've got a team where all of a sudden you're seeing a lot of resignations, then, you know, that's an opportunity to recognise that there's a problem there and dissect exactly what's going on. But I don't think it's a one size fits all in terms of measuring it, because it depends on the size of the company that you are, and, you know, the different types of teams that you have.
Well, so last word from you. I've heard Victoria say that the ability to speak the truth at work is very important. On the other hand, if everyone spoke the truth at work all the time, it would be like any relationship. It would probably turn sour quite quickly. So there must be a balance there to be struck. But would you describe yourself as an enthusiast or a skeptic about the possibility of measuring corporate culture as one of the benchmarks all the people on this panel should be looking at as part of managing a successful business?
I think, yeah, I just echo what other people have said. I guess it's for us, like a culture of openness runs through the business. So everyone is responsible for everything in a way. Everyone is responsible for the product. I think measurability for us would be down to testing. If something isn't working in testing, someone's probably been sloppy along the way somewhere, and everyone is responsible for it. So even if one element of the culture or one individual isn't doing so well, or isn't as sharp in a particular time, or isn't feeling great and has maybe cut some corners, we will pick up on it anyway. So yeah, everyone's made responsible, but I think it comes down to leadership as well. And you know, going on what Victoria said there as well, I think what we do is put employee polls in place, but they're not random, they're conversation starters. So that the managers can actually have open conversations to say, okay, how can we improve? How can we do better? And, you know, each employee has their own targets, their own sort of ways of being driven to the next level, which in turn drives the culture. And yeah, exactly as everyone else has pretty much said, you are a byproduct of your culture, and it you know, grows what you grow as an organisation.
I'm going to stop there. I'm afraid I'll commend to all of you Kathryn's insight that you should always ask your staff how they felt on Sunday night. You can ask them that first thing on Monday morning. And I think that's one measure which would be very accurate for you. Sadly, we have to stop there. I'd like to thank all of our panelists: Harriet Rees of Starling, Scott Jones from Illustrate Digital, Dan Lyons from Admiral, Andrew from Confused.com, Sally Foote of Go Compare, Kathryn, of course, from Cardiff University, with that brilliant insight, Victoria Wood from Be Digital and Talent Be, Simon Holland from Wealthify, and also thanks to everybody who was watching and listening. And I hope you all have a great evening. Thanks very much for joining us. It's goodbye from us. Give us all a wave.
Thank you so much, Dominic.
It's really good.
And everyone else, lovely to meet you all.
Thank you.
Great, cheers.
Thanks.